Wanted to welcome again everyone who is just now joining. Today's discussion on cycling infrastructure financing will stem from the newly launched report, Path Less Traveled, that ITDP collaborated on with the World Bank. And I'm dropping the link to the report this second. The report includes several case studies, including Lima, Peru. Today's panel will include representatives from ITDP, World Bank, and Lima to share with us some key takeaways and challenges and opportunities around cycle infrastructure financing. I am happy to introduce to you today's panel. First, we have Dana Yanoka. She's a Senior Research Manager at ITDP Global. Dana authored many reports and policy briefs on cycling, and she also spearheads the Cycling Cities campaign at ITDP. Dana will share some insights from the report, making the case for financing active mobility, and she will also moderate the discussion. Next, we'll have Winnie Wang, Senior Transport Specialist with the World Bank Group. She has an international experience in transport planning, and she's going to dive into the key takeaways around the process and stakeholders' work stemming from several case studies in the report. And finally, we have representatives from Lima, Peru. We are actually waiting for the speakers, but right now, Carlos Barzola from the Transport Department is filling in for Elvira Cabrera. So if she shows up, she is Urban Mobility Manager at the Municipality of Lima. She will talk about the scale-up process for cycling infrastructure, including World Bank support. So I will just invite now Dana to start us off.
Great, thanks, Ivana. Should I share my screen or will you share the slides?
I can share the slides, just give me a second.
Sure, no worries.
Thank you so much. There it is, it should be visible.
Great. Thanks, Ivana, and thanks everyone for joining today. We have a big group here, which is great to see so much interest in this topic. Ivana, you can go to the next slide. As Ivana mentioned, we recently released a report called the Path Less Traveled, so I will be giving a little bit of background on the report to start us off today, and then I'm going to hand things over to Winnie to talk a little bit about the takeaways from the report and some of the next steps that we're looking to continue this work. So I hope some of you have seen this report. We did release it at the end of last year at the COP28 in Dubai. But really excited to have this opportunity to share it again, and really looking forward to the discussion and your questions after. Next slide. So why invest in active mobility? So the genesis of this report really came from this question and some conversations that ITDP had with the World Bank, with a number of other development banks, as well as partner organizations working in this space, trying to understand why active mobility investments were not being made at the scale that we had seen for other transport and urban development investments. So we had those conversations, and this report is really a follow-up to what we heard, and also trying to quantify some of these benefits and some of these challenges that stemmed from those conversations. So we see a lot of opportunity for investment in active mobility. Obviously, a great way to promote decarbonization, replacing higher polluting trips with low to no emission trips, walking and cycling. We also see active mobility as an opportunity to increase ridership for public transportation, thinking about expanding catchment areas around public transport stations, using walking and cycling networks. And we also know that active mobility investments generate a whole host of economic and social benefits. So things like improved health outcomes, greenhouse gas emission savings, and even road safety improvements. And because cycle lanes and footpaths, these networks are quick to build, we can realize those benefits in the near term. And that's really important when we're thinking about the climate emergency and the urgency around the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants from the air. So we have good evidence of these benefits. And we know that a large share of trips in most cities around the world are made using active mobility, but still investment in these modes has been really limited compared to other sustainable transport modes like metro and BRT, and certainly compared to investments in roads and similar car infrastructure. You can go to the next slide. We also know that demand is there for investing in active mobility in cities around the world. ITDP has been working with a cohort of 34 cities as part of our Cycling Cities campaign for the past few years. And all of these cities have committed to expanding cycle infrastructure on the ground and adopting supportive policies and implementing programs that really help people to access cycling for their everyday trips. So this is just, you know, one campaign. There are many others that have emerged over the years. But just to say that there really is demand for these types of investments. And we see that demand growing as we continue to work with new cities across new regions. You can go to the next slide. So we know that the evidence is there to support the types of benefits that active mobility infrastructure can generate. And we know that demand is there from the cities, but we're still not seeing the investment in these types of projects. So the Path Less Traveled report is really meant to make the case for scaling up financing for active mobility. And we do that by drawing some lessons from 5 case study cities. So those are the 5 you see here: Lima, Peru; Tianjin, China; Addis Ababa, Ethiopia; Dar es Salaam, Tanzania; and Buenos Aires, Argentina. We chose these cities because they each have an investment, a large-scale investment in active mobility infrastructure. In some cases, it's a standalone active mobility project. In some other cases, the active mobility piece is part of a larger transport or urban development project. And some of these cases do narrowly focus on cycle infrastructure, while others focus more broadly on pedestrian infrastructure and other types of streetscape improvements. And I do want to just touch on a couple of these cases before I turn things over to Winnie. I'm not going to talk about all of them because we are short on time today. And fortunately, we have a representative from Lima here with us to give us a little bit more of a deep dive on the story of investment in Lima. So you can go to the next slide, Abona. So the first case that I want to highlight is Tianjin, China. Tianjin is really a model when it comes to this type of large-scale investment in active mobility. It's actually the largest project dedicated to active mobility that's ever been funded by the World Bank. And it's truly a city-scale project, over 125 kilometers of cycle lanes, and large investments in things like complete streets and other streetscape redevelopment projects as well. ITDP is really excited to have awarded Tianjin our Sustainable Transport Award for 2024 because of this effort. And I think it's worth noting that the entry point here, the reason for this type of large-scale investment in active mobility was really to increase metro ridership. So Tianjin had invested in building out its metro system in recent years and wasn't seeing the level of ridership the city had expected, and really saw investments in active mobility as a way to maximize their investment in the metro system and continue to grow metro ridership as the system continues to be implemented in the coming years. You can go to the next slide, Ivana. The next city I want to highlight is Addis Ababa. The entry point for investment in Addis was really an effort to support and prioritize the modes of transport that are most used by Ethiopians, and that's non-motorized transport, cycling and walking. So Addis Ababa adopted an NMT plan in 2018 that aimed to prioritize and improve the safety of pedestrian and cycle infrastructure, while also limiting demand and use of private vehicles. So that includes 200 kilometers of cycle lanes planned across the city by 2028, as well as pedestrian infrastructure improvements. And what's really notable is that NMT plan created an NMT department within the city structure. And that's really important for thinking about institutionalizing this NMT plan and creating clear responsibility for implementing projects in line with the NMT plan. And this also led to the creation of an NMT department at the national level as part of development of a national NMT plan, which was adopted in 2020. So a lot of alignment between priority for pedestrian and cycle infrastructure, both at the city level and the national level in Ethiopia. And a lot of coordination between those two levels of government in terms of investment in active mobility. You can go to the next slide. And then the last case I want to highlight is Buenos Aires. This is a really interesting example of really primarily city level investment in a cycle lane network. You can see on the slide here a pretty extensive cycle lane network that is in place in Buenos Aires, and that's largely been invested in by the city. And those investments were made as a strategy to deliver on some of the mobility goals that were set out in the city's sustainable mobility plan, as well as its climate action plan. So these investments in cycle infrastructure were really meant to reduce the use of private vehicles and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. And some economic evaluations that were supported by the World Bank on a couple of key protected cycle lanes that were implemented during the pandemic shows some really strong rates of return on those investments, as well as benefit to cost ratios. So those types of evaluations provide some really helpful evidence for the city to continue these types of investments, not only within the jurisdiction of the city or the boundaries of the city, but also thinking about expanding that network more regionally. So with that, I will turn things over to Winnie to close us out.
Thank you, Dana, for the wonderful presentation and introduction. Ivana, to make it easy, I can share screen so I can, control my speed. Let me switch to me. Is it okay? Yeah.
Yes, sure. I'll stop sharing them.
Mm-hmm. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, just go to the full screen view, the bottom right, the icon, the very last icon on the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Let me move this out.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for your time. So, Dana has introduced to you several of the case studies, and most of them World Bank played a big role on, make it happen with financing. Here are some takeaways. You probably have figured out most of them yourself by listening to Dana's presentation so far. But I would like to give you a summary, the key takeaways after our joint research on these case studies that can help build the future for active mobility investment. Number one is to build the institutional framework. As you see in most of our climate countries, especially in the developing world, most of our institutions do not have the internal capacity to institutionalize the active mobility. Actually, as a matter of fact, a lot of them don't have dedicated team or dedicated institution, where to put this active mobility program with, who to work with. That's number one challenge. And number two, as you all know, we do not have a standardized cost-benefit analysis tool to comprehensively evaluate the benefit of such investment. There are different piecemeals here, there. Even the same case study can have different ratio come out, the investment ratio, because we do not have a standardized a tool, and there's no methodology documented that can capture all these benefits Dana has mentioned. That's number one key takeaway from our joint research. Number two, we go down to the project level. At the preparation level, it's very important, to consider active mobility as a key component for a part of the integrated urban planning system, including, land use development plans. Because if it's not part of the plan, it's hard to add it later on. But if it's part of the plan, it's easier to justify the financial investment on that. Number two, we can use active mobility as a pathway to advance much broader urban mobility goals, integration, also accessibility, that kind of goals. Number three, at the project preparation level, we could also include components that go beyond just the cycling lane, but also include bike sharing program, right? Parking and capacity building. Those things can keep the investment in a more sustainable manner. And then go back to the financing challenge, which is one of the biggest challenge. It's important we learned, from our case studies to build coalitions and encourage blended financing. Consider multiple financing instruments, even those innovative financing such as climate financing or other grants, that to make the financing package bigger and enough to scale up the active mobility investment. Also, we should consider pooling resources from parties motivated by related interests that go beyond just the transport, such as public health, climate, or urban development. As you guys know, in the US, National Institute of Health also supported some of the analysis on cycling interest. That's just one case in point that we should, bring all the interested parties together and collect as much funding as possible to make it work. And then also, leverage existing project preparation facility or create new ones to help prepare the components ready for investment. That's so important from our case studies. And finally, on the implementation level, it's also important for the project management units to set up targets to track the key performance indicators, to track the delivery and impacts. That's very useful for future scaling up or, securing additional funding in the near future. These are the key takeaways. Next slide, we actually, drill down on the exact actions we are calling for different stakeholders in this active mobility investment. First, to the national and the local governments, we think it's very important to have a plan ready. A lot of clients we work with, they do not have a national active mobility plan. Even when stakeholders are interested, we have to start from scratch. If we have a plan ready, it will make it much easier to, enter the market of active mobility and make some components really happen. So number one is to have a national plan that can deliver multimodal transport options to be part of the integrated urban mobility planning process. And number two is to develop guidelines and design standards that can incorporate active mobility. These two are very important because once the dialogues are ready or financing is ready, if these two are already in place, that makes the entry much more easier. That's why, through our research, we find these two preparational work are very important to have in place, and also build consensus in the national or local institutions to understand the importance of active mobility. Number three, we are calling for bold, ideas such as tie the national funding to the requirement for road investment, or mass transit, metro or BRT project, to include cycling or pedestrian infrastructure, to be part of the big, transport infrastructure planning process. Number four is to communicate benefits of active mobility with the general public early on, to build, support before the project actually start. these are the actions we are asking for national and local government to get ready for. Next slide, we talk about, the actions development banks, development partners like World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and other banks can adopt, to support this initiative. Number one, we're talking about adapting a standardized cost-benefit analysis methodology to make the case to justify all the benefits that can be captured from active mobility investments. Number two, we're calling for our development partners to increase funding to build knowledge and technical capacity with our national and local governments to get them ready for such initiatives. Number three, we are looking for dedicated funding window under the global facility to decarbonize transport. It's a global fund grant to finance project preparation and pilots of cycling and active mobility investments. In addition to the development partners, we also look for action support that philanthropy or civil society organizations can provide, can be part of this journey together. Number one is to provide technical assistance to our cities and national governments to develop and implement such cycling network planning programs. Number two is really use your coordination on the ground to coordinate with key stakeholders to identify and address the key knowledge gaps, data missing parts, and also financing gaps. We believe this 360-degree call for actions will make sure that all key stakeholders who are keen on active mobility can play a role and contribute to the overall objective we want to achieve. Next slide, just generalize the way forward through our joint research with ITDP. The general way forward, we're thinking that to get more international financing for active mobility. As you see, Dana has mentioned, all the case studies, we made clear entry point. We made it very clear in the report that you will see a very clear entry point for each investment and a path forward. And we want to summarize here for all of your benefit. Number one is to leverage the existing financing flow to unlock and expand financing. Saying this, as Dana mentioned, sorry, let me go back. Because I think several of the case studies, including Tianjin, the entry point is actually to connect to, for example, the mass transit program. Tianjin, I think, is studied with the metro program and how cycling lane can help increase the catchment area and the attractiveness of metro system. That's one great entry point. So we learn from that. It's important for us to connect our active mobility investment to railway, urban rail, to road, to BRT project design, that it shows a clear benefit and to make it a solid complement to the mass transit investment program. That's a good entry point we identified. The second one is to use entry point outside of transport. I mentioned in the previous slides, identify other parties who are interested and see the benefits of active mobility, such as urban development, utilities, green infrastructure, or public health, like the US system, or climate system, that climate financing that really care about how we can reduce the carbon emissions. So for all these parties interested in the benefit that active mobility can bring and leverage their funding for the investment on that. The third is to tap into different emerging or new innovative climate financing grant mechanism and to blend with what is available potentially from national funding, local funding, and the development banks to really make the package as big as possible to cover a large scale of active mobility infrastructure investment. These are the key three pathway we see from our research that can be immediately available for cities or countries who would like to pursue this path. Finally, I just want to mention to you the ongoing work we are working with ITDP. As you see, we identified lacking of a standardized methodology and tool to estimate the investment return is one of the barriers to justify, to make the case for active mobility. So with that, The World Bank team, led by me and my colleagues George and Dana and her team, we are working on develop such a model, and we hope to make it, open source, a global public good that in the future, all key stakeholders can use that to justify all the benefits that active mobility can bring to our society and justify the investments that is needed for such initiatives. So stay tuned, and we hope, in the future webinar, we can present to you the new tool and collect more support for, this initiative. Thank you. I'll stop here. Over to you, Ivana.
Thank you so much, Winnie. This was very wonderful. I appreciate that. You can unshare your screen. And I see Elvira actually is in the room from the Lima office. So I will invite Elvira to share her presentation for about 10 minutes.
Buenos días.
Good morning, everyone.
¿Me escuchan?
Yes,
Can
we
you all hear me?
Ok, muy bien, gracias.
Great, thank you.
Vamos a iniciar nuestra presentación. Mi nombre es Elvira Moscoso Cabrera.
Let me start my presentation. My name is Elvira Moscoso Cabrera. I'm the manager of urban mobility from Lima. We have a team working on cycle lanes, and there's a series of things that we'd like you to learn about us, as well as we're also interested in receiving your input. Let me start by stating that
Pasemos a la primera pantalla, por favor. Tenemos unos datos importantes generales.
we have some important general figures.
Lima, la ciudad capital, tiene
Lima, Peru's capital city,
10 millones de habitantes.
has 10 million people.
El área de expansión, como se menciona en la diapositiva, son 2.800.
The city has an area of 2.8 thousand square kilometers, and we have an estimate of 24 million trips per day, according to our Urban Transport Authority. This body was created in 2019 in order to manage mass transit in the capital city and Callao. Lima has been working in cycle lanes and urban transport, and it has carried out a series of studies, for example, with the World Bank, to take a look at cycle lanes as well as mass transit. As of this date, we're implementing a program to improve traffic management. It involves transit, centralized traffic lights, electronic management. It also includes programs to improve traffic calming measures. And it includes also another set of studies and programs. We have the financial contribution agreement with KfW. And as you will learn, we have complementary agreements and an MOU with C40.
Quería hacer esta presentación acompañándome de dos profesionales que forman parte del equipo. En este
I
caso,
wanted to have two professionals that are part of our team for this presentation. I'm going to give the floor to one of them, and then another part will be led by engineer Carlos Barzola. Good morning. Thank you, Elvira. We would like to share the work that we've done during the last years. In 2019, the World Bank started two important studies on cycle lanes for the metropolitan area, and it defined the need of 1,380 kilometers in addition to the existing 210 kilometers. The second document talks about the strategies to promote cycling. As a result of these studies, we obtain a cost-benefit analysis using a methodology applied by a specialized company specializing in bike economics, ISISIO, and it quantified certain externalities, including travel times, contamination, air pollution, congestion, among others. The interesting thing is that for every dollar invested in road cycling infrastructure, we would be receiving 19 soles. This study shows the high profitability of investing in this type of infrastructure. So this is the starting point to realize that Lima has a great potential for these investments. Historically, as Elvira mentioned, Lima has had received concrete support. In 2005, we had a 60-kilometer baseline, and with the World Bank, there was a 300-kilometer network proposed. The next study, the World Bank defined a 210-kilometer baseline and proposed 1,380 kilometers. During the pandemic, we had a quick study, and on that 210-kilometer baseline, an additional 40 kilometers were proposed, and those were built during the pandemic. We also heard about institutions and regulations. I think it's very important to consider those. We have two planning documents that have been duly approved, and they provide continuity to our projects. First, we have our local climate change plan, establishing 640 kilometers of cycle lanes. And the 2040 plan met considered a lot of the cycle lanes proposed by the World Bank plan and stated that Lima required an additional 740 kilometers of cycle lanes. These instruments that were approved provide the grounds for our policy. We need to highlight the relevance of the bibliography and the assistance of ITDP. And we took those concepts. First, our work in superstructure, the work with the activists, being close with them. As for structure, we talk about the legal and technical standards and their approval. And we also need to consider infrastructure. That is specifically the works, the kilometers of cycle paths, as well as the parking spaces. In addition to these three components, we believe that we need to add an additional one called the polystructure. And it talks about the management and the work done at the mayor's office level, city hall, ministries, urban mobility bodies, and the connection with international institutions such as World Bank, ITDP, C40, KfW, as well as along with central governments. So this joint work allows us to show that a policy can be sustainable from different perspectives. I'll give the floor now to Engineer Carlos Barzola, We'll talk about the specific work on planning, what we have found, and where we're headed. Thank you. Hello, everyone. As Javier mentioned, we are all part of the urban mobility office. We have established certain strategies in connection with our work with ITDP. First, identifying the infrastructure, the structure, the superstructure, and the polystructure, each one from different angles. So we had already a 2040 approved plan, and we have an existing cycle lane network. 266 of them are permanent, and we have 66 kilometers that were emerging and that were established during the pandemic. All of these add to 332 kilometers as of January 2023. The challenges that we have identified when we came into our office was the lack of connection to join that network or to have an actual network. We also have a lack of access to strategic connection points. And we also had very little, close to zero budget for cycle lane maintenance. So once we had the baseline information, we started making the distribution for each of the 4 macro zones or districts. In each one of them, we identified the existing bike lanes, the population and the ratio. For the central district, we have 191 kilometers and a 2.1 million population. Thus, we have 0.91 kilometers of cycle lanes per 10,000 inhabitants ratio. We did so for other areas. In south, we have a 0.36 ratio, and north and east have the same percentage, 0.13. That means that the central district is the one that is more consolidated, but still, it still lacks the interconnection between existing lanes. As I mentioned, these are the permanent cycle lanes. These are the emerging cycle lanes. And with the KFW projects, in green, you can see the 9.5 kilometers for 2023. And for the next year, for 2024, another 52 kilometers, another 52 kilometers for 2025, which add to 164 additional kilometers, including the projects that we have with the World Bank investment programs. That includes about another 50. Ultimately, we will have about 500 kilometers by 2025, which is a 50% increase as compared to 2023. We have identified that in order to connect those existing and projected cycle lanes, we need 119 kilometers, and we're currently looking for financing sources in order to have a more coherent grid or network for our cyclists. So even though we have financing for 100 kilometers with C40 and 150 kilometers with the World Bank, we still need the financing for those 119. By 2026, we'll need 617 kilometers. As for the international cooperation, what we currently have, we have had 20 million euro from German corporations, 50 kilometers under construction, and 150 under study with the World Bank. And with C40, we have technical assistance to study for studies of 100 kilometers and the interconnection studies between San Juan and Cercado de Lima. We have focused our efforts in the central area of Lima. It has the highest concentration of trips. It's the financial center of the city. So we have the 2023 ratios, and we have added the additional projects, including KfW and World Bank, using the 191 kilometer baseline plus 46 with KfW and 50 with the World Bank. This adds to 287 kilometers by 2025. I'll give the floor now to Elvira so she can continue with her presentation.
Bien. Esperamos que rápidamente les hayamos puesto en contexto.
So hopefully we gave you some context about the conditions of this topic in Lima. This administration took office in last year, and we took a look at what we had as an existing infrastructure and the actions that were taken by the city of Lima. As you might have seen or learned, we have a high demand, we have a great potential to move a lot of people, and the evident need to connect the existing infrastructure. The central macro zone is one of the main destinations, but we need not disregard the peripheral macro zones. It still has a lot of people and a high volume of demand. So our priorities include connecting the existing cycle lanes, of course, after making the right technical assessment of what are the right ones, also providing road safety. That's one of the key issues that we need to consider, the lack of road safety, in addition to education to all road users, i.e. drivers and cyclists themselves, to learn to make proper use of cycle lanes. But we also need to enhance or improve the manuals and the existing regulations. We have seen that Ministry of Housing or Transportation still are not clear about how to integrate this transportation model in the regulations methodologies. The financial part is very hard for them to get a grasp of, or they use it or they address it as public transit or public transportation. So we have this task of helping them understand this from the reality or from the perspective of the city's reality. We have several municipal entities that need to be made aware of what we have and what needs to be improved. And also to coordinate our work with the international bodies. We are also optimizing the support that we have received, since we weren't previously being connected, didn't connect our studies, action plans, and investments. We weren't targeting the right goal of being harmonized and addressing the actual needs of our cyclists, of road safety, and achieving the right coordination with our existing mass transit. For that purpose, we already started having meetings with our technical bodies. And for example, we started developing or projecting parking hubs. Any kind of support that you might think you might provide to our plans will be welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elvira, for this great overview. I'm really impressed with your work and how you are really presenting this as a process, as a really complete process, aside from financing, including education and the behavior change. So really thank you for this great overview of your work on cycling. So we do not have that much time. We may go over maybe just a couple of minutes to answer some questions, but I'll invite Dana to pose them to the speakers.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for the great questions coming in. Unfortunately, we won't have enough time to address all of them, but it's great to see such diverse interest in this topic. So maybe I'll just start by going back to Winnie. I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned, one of the recommendations from the report, this idea of aligning active mobility infrastructure investments with other portfolios, so things like health and urban development. I'm curious what guidance you might give to cities that might be thinking about how to access those funding streams. So what that looks like on maybe the city side, and then what that also looks like on the bank side, like how that actually unlocks more financing to be made available for active mobility.
Thanks, Dana. A very good question, a challenging question. I think it actually goes back to one of my recommendations, our recommendations, Dana, our joint report on have a plan and institutions that is dedicated to support this initiative. For example, from the countryside, from national government or our city government, it's important when there are momentum to invest on active mobility that cities can look beyond your transport planning division, can look at, the health department. Do they have any funding or initiative that can link with your cycling or walking initiative? And also look at your urban development programs to see whether their connection or entry points to link with active mobility. So that takes coordination from the government side. At the World Bank side, for example, we already have started. As some of you know, we have urban unit. We have urban global practice that's dedicated to improve urban space livelihood of that. We have transport practice, which I'm housed in. We also have the health department. We have frequent meetings to talk about joint efforts, joint coordinations, where we can actually aggregate demands and pull the funding together to support our clients. So as I said, it takes two, both the government side and the development banks or partners side. Both sides should work on an integrated, coordinated manner to make sure we can pour as much as resource as we can to support this initiative. Thank you, Dana.
Thanks, Winnie. I think that's a really helpful answer. Moving over to Elvira, there are a lot of questions coming in about the cost-benefit analysis that was done in Lima that was supported by the World Bank. I don't think we can get into some of the technical methodology questions today, but maybe just broadly, I would be curious to hear about how having that information, I think it was the 19-to-1 cost benefit to cost ratio, how has having that information helped to advance the goals of that Lima has had for the cycle network? Did that help to bring in more partners? Is that being used to underscore additional funding? Can you just talk a little bit about how having that evidence has helped to advance the program.
Muy bien, voy a pasarle a Javier para que nos explique este punto.
I will let Javier explain this point. Thank you. Information of this magnitude has a significant impact. This is a methodology worked by the CISO. It's a Dutch company that was part of the team appointed or established by the World Bank for this study. Throughout our presentation, or the presentation of the studies made by the World Bank, this data, this figure has been communicated, and I think that has had an impact. For example, it allowed C40 to look at Lima as an opportunity to invest, because each dollar or each euro invested would yield an interesting IRR, because there are studies that showed that study is available at the World Bank website. So you can take a look at both reports, and whoever wants can see how we got to that figure. Hence the importance of this standardized methodology requirement. That would be very significant in order to draw in more attention. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And we maybe have time for just one last question. This is coming from a colleague in Guatemala who's asking about, it's important to think about investment in the implementation of cycle infrastructure, but there's kind of still an outstanding question about maintenance. And I think this was mentioned in the Lima presentation. So maybe for both Winnie and the Lima team, how can we think about necessary investment in cycle lane maintenance, and how could that be perhaps integrated into initial financing packages? Maybe start with Winnie and then we'll go to Lima.
Thank you. Good question. I think it's a question we all have to think together. As you see, investment on cycling, especially cycling, is a relatively new thing in the past decade. I think not many emerging markets have done that. That's an area I think all of us have to think seriously about how to, as Dana mentioned, integrate it into part of the investment to make sure it's sustainable in the future. Like some of the colleagues said, we have done a lot on roads and a lot on public transport, on asset management. I think this is another area we should all look into that to see whether it can be part of the performance-based contract or some other approach to include maintenance during the construction site already, to ensure it's part of it without being ignored. But thank you for the question. Good that we have to work on it.
Absolutely, thanks, Winnie. Elvira and the Lima team, maybe just a final thought on this question around maintenance and maybe how you all are thinking about that as you continue to seek funding and partnership for the cycle lane network build out.
Sí, esa es un punto muy importante. Lo hemos
That's
estado...
a very important point. During 2023, we looked into it. It's not only maintenance of the infrastructure, also including, for example, signaling. In our case, in some areas, they're used to throw garbage, or some people, some motorcycle riders use or motor taxis use cycle lanes. In fact, they have turned them into exclusive lanes for them. We have held meetings and workshops with different municipal bodies, and there were two aspects that I think come up. First, considering advertisement close to cycling lanes in order to use those funds for maintenance. We need to figure out how well targeted or well guided advertisement that could be complementary to the use of bicycles might prove to be an ally for financing if those funds are used for maintenance. But we are also thinking about using control cameras. Our country 2 or 3 years ago approved traffic violations for those vehicles that use cycle lanes when they're not allowed to. So using electronic means, i.e. cameras, and if the administrative authority, i.e. us, could use those electronic tools and using those fines in order to target the funds for maintenance. And it's not just for the cycle lane in itself. For example, improving design, traffic lights, cycling lights. So we have thought about those two aspects. We're trying to shape them a little better, and I believe that we give them the right use. I think they will be a good source of financing. It's not just a matter of asking for the Ministry of Finance for money. We need to make them self-sustainable.
Great, thanks so much, Elvira. And unfortunately, Winnie had to run to another meeting, so I think it's probably a good time to wrap up. So thank you, everyone, for joining. And I'll turn it back over to Abuna to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much for everyone joining today and the speakers who are able to stay with us a little bit longer to tackle this really intricate topic. The chat really says it all, that there's a lot of interest around cycle infrastructure financing. So we hope to have more sessions on cycling in the near future, so stay tuned. There is a link to our next webinar in the chat. Feel free to register at this moment. And with that, I really, really want to thank again Dana, Winnie, Elvira, and the entire Lima team for speaking to us today. I hope this really inspired many cities to tackle their infrastructure development and financing. So again, see you at the next session, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.